Hello everybody, my name is Christian Waguespack. I'm the Curator of 20th Century Art here at the New Mexico Museum of Art in Santa Fe. And this is Ray Sandoval, and he is the Zozobra Events Chairperson for Zozobra. And we're going to talk a bit about how somebody makes an entire day job out of Zozobra.
Like 3 days worth.
But I want to, yes.
Competing with the air conditioning.
Yeah.
So if you can speak up.
Okay, so I'll be extra loud, and if I start to trail off, if anybody in the back wants to just put their hand up, I'll need to be more loud. But today, thank you all for joining us. This is our last event of People to People, which is a lecture series that we put together as part of the museum's centennial programming. Our museum's 100 years old this year. We came up with 3 new exhibitions to celebrate that centennial, and you're sitting in one of them right now. That exhibition is Horizons, People in Place in New Mexican Art. And it's divided up into a variety of categories, but today we're particularly concerned with the section that we're sitting in, and it's artwork by New Mexicans about the theme of community. And whenever we think about community in Santa Fe, one of the first things that probably comes to mind is Zozobra, right? So we included him twice. Once in this Louis Tapia sculpture that folks on the internet can't see, and then in this set of murals by Wil Schuster, which you guys online can see. And we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a minute. But I'm really excited to have Ray here, and we're going to have a little informal kind of discussion about the history of Zozobra and the state of Zozobra today, and then we're going to open it up to questions and comments from you guys. So, without further ado, welcome.
Thank you guys for
We're
having
really
me.
pleased to have you here. Can we start out, just for people who may not know, can you tell us a little bit about who Zozobra is? What is Zozobra?
So Zozobra is Santa Fe's boogeyman, right? He is he's the culmination, as Schuster would like to describe it, of all of the things that we do to each other throughout the year when we disappoint each other, we lie to each other, or we don't live up to our own expectations, and it causes this gloominess in our life. And so Zozobra is a specter that continues to gather and gather until he takes physical form sometime in September, and we have to rid ourselves of him in order to have a happy fiesta. And we rid ourselves of him by actually luring him out of hiding and and we do this. It's pretty ingenious the way the mythology works, and we'll jump around a little bit today. But so the idea is that Zozobra's out there in the foothills, and he's eating sheep, and he's causing mischief, and he's doing all these different things. And so the city fathers get together and decide, hey, how can we get him out of hiding? And the idea is, okay, let's use Zozobra's ego against him, and we'll issue a formal invitation to him to come, and we'll throw this huge pre-fiesta party in his honor, right? And because of his ego, he's going to accept this. And they're right, Zozobra does accept this, and that's why he shows up in a bow tie and a cummerbund, because he is the guest of honor at his own party. But Zozobra's reason for accepting that invitation is kind of like a Trojan horse. This is his opportunity to get into downtown Santa Fe and then wreak havoc on everything. So there's a little bit of mischief and deceit on both sides. They're trying to get him out of hiding, and he agrees to it, not because he wants to make friends, but this is the perfect opportunity to get into downtown Santa Fe.
Gosh, that sounds horrifying.
It gets worse.
Okay. Do you want to tell us more about it?
Sure.
Okay.
So
how does it get worse?
We'll go back to the beginning.
Okay.
So the beginning is that Schuster basically is an 18-year-old who gets drafted into World War I. He's put into the trenches of France, and he gets mustard gas. And when he gets back to Philadelphia, he's having a really hard time breathing. And so his doctor says, well, you can try to stay here and live maybe 6 months, or you can go out west and maybe make 2 or 3 years. So he took his doctor's advice, moved out to Santa Fe, but he lived another 25 years after that. So we were happy that he did that. But when he got here, he had no skill. He had not done any kind of trade. And so he actually met John Sloan, who was a kind of a Renaissance man, who was a painter, a sculptor, an inventor, and he kind of took Schuster under his wing. And before long, he was part of the Cinco Pintores, or the 5 painters that actually are the reason why Santa Fe became the art destination that it had become. And I remember even my grandfather telling me that they used to call them 5 nuts in a hut, because they were so poor that they had to live in one house. And what they decided to do is that they would share their luck. And that's how Schuster would always describe it, is that one of them would sell a painting or a sculptor, and all 5 of them would live off of it, off the proceeds, until the next time that they sold a painting. Well, it just so happens that one Christmas Eve, the Christmas Eve of 1923, is one of them sells a painting for a substantial amount of money, and they decide it's Christmas Eve, the hell with it, we're not going to be frugal, we're going to go blow it, right? We're going to go have this wonderful time. So they decide that they're going to go down to La Fonda's restaurant. And so they start drinking and they're eating, and Schuster notices that the entire group is just kind of melancholy. And he doesn't understand this because he's like, we're in La Fonda, we're drinking, we have lots of food, like it's snowing outside, like this is a perfect Christmas Eve. And he writes this in his diary that he's just really perplexed at why people were just kind of in this funk. And so at one point, he just kind of decides, okay, you guys have got to get out of this funk. And they proceed, everyone gets a little bit giggly for a minute, and then everyone goes kind of back to their melancholiness. And so he says, this isn't going to do. So he waits till the waiter goes back, he goes to the bar, and he grabs napkins, and he demands that everyone write down what's bothering them on a napkin. And from my understanding, Schuster was quite the character, and he commanded a lot of, he could basically walk in a room and make people do things they didn't want to do. That was just kind of the personality that he had. And so he demands that they write down their problems. He then waits till the bartender goes back into the side. He gets on top of the bar. He lights all of their napkins on fire and declares that what's bothering them is done. Well, what happens is the bartender comes back and they all get kicked out on their butt. So now they're sitting freezing in the snow on the plaza. But that was really the origin of where Zozobra started. And it was this idea that you could physically put down what was bothering you and then burn it away and getting in a way of exercising this. And so consequently, so this is Christmas. So that Good Friday of 24, he actually goes down to Mexico and he witnesses that they had created a 5-foot effigy of Judas. And what they would do is they would put it on a cart and they would take it around and people would throw shoes at it, they would spit at it, they would holler at it, and at the end it would go into the plaza and then they would burn Judas away. And so really, he comes back and he's noodling these two ideas. So this idea that you could burn gloom with this idea that you could have an effigy. But he was very, very clear to say that he didn't want anything for religious or political purposes, so it had to be the boogeyman. It couldn't be this religious or political figure, and he wanted everyone in the community to agree that they could actually that they disliked this figure. And so Old Man Groucher was born. And so he appeared in 1924 in a backyard barbecue that Schuster was having as a pre-fiesta party. And so they lit this thing on fire and thought, hey, this is a great idea, right? We get to write down our glooms, we get to light this thing on fire. So they do it the following year, and more people show up that Schuster didn't invite to his backyard to watch this thing being burned, right? And then, so Schuster decides at this time, about 1926, that he's going to approach the Fiesta Council, who's now been celebrating fiestas for over 200 years, and say, hey, I got a great idea for you. Let's burn this effigy to kick off your holy fiesta, right? Well, you can imagine what the Fiesta Council said. They told him to get the blankety out of there, right? So, not to be deterred, Schuster and his friends decide that they're going to be a little bit of jokesters. And so they decide in 26, 27-ish that they're going to hold a pre-fiesta that's called Pasatiempo. And so they burn Old Man Groucher on Friday. They then dress up all their pets as members of the Fiesta Council, right? So it wasn't just to dress up your pet. They actually dressed them up as members of the Fiesta Council and paraded them around the plaza. And then on Sunday, they did their hysterical parade, which would make fun of all of these things. Well, soon enough, the Pasatiempo got more popular than the actual fiesta. And so the Fiesta Council decided that maybe they made a mistake. So they go back to Schuster and they say, you know, we're having a little bit of a hard time with some of our events. We were a little rash. Why don't we at least try this? And so that is really the shotgun wedding between Zozobra and Fiestas that happened.
That's a fantastic story.
Who knew?
Right? He knew. So let's back up a bit and talk a little bit about you. How does one get a job working with Zozobra, and what happened to make you realize that you wanted to be so involved with this character?
So it was funny. So we had a big, so my family is actually pretty small, so I only have 2 older sisters, but I have a million cousins here. And our parents would take turns taking all the cousins to Zozobra. And I'll remember that maybe when I was 3 or 4, my dad would put me on his shoulders and we would try to get to the front as much as possible. And my cousins, who were just a couple years older than me, they would grab onto my dad's leg and they would cry and they didn't want to see Zozobra. And I was just like in awe of this thing that was just like moving. And then so Zozobra would start on fire, the lights would come on, my cousins would be cheering and I would be crying for Zozobra. So my parents always thought there was something weird about that. So I go to kindergarten for the first time, and this is like, kindergarten starts around mid-August, and the teacher explains that throughout the year she would like us to get folks to come and do show and tell. So I go home that afternoon, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but they used to give out the little postcards at Zozobra. When you would enter, they would give out postcards, and so as a kid, I collected all these little postcards. And I turned it over, and obviously we didn't have cell phones or the internet, so I went to the phone book, and I couldn't spell Kiwanis for the life of me, so I had to keep looking it up. And I call, and Griff Dodge, who was the secretary of the Kiwanis Club at the time, answers the phone, and I say, can you come do show and tell at my school? And he says, sure. So they show up the next day, and I got in trouble because I didn't understand the nuances of scheduling show and tell. But anyway, the teacher allowed Griff and Harold Gans, who was the voice of Zozobra, to do their presentation for us. And at the end of that, Harold said, we're stuffing Zozobra tonight, would you like to come? And my face just kind of lit up. And so he wrote down the address, and I got home and I bugged my parents to take me. And so I started stuffing Zozobra. And everyone was fascinated with the construction of the head. So you had like these little groupies that were all around the head. And back then, the Kiwanis Club was set up kind of like the Senate, the United States Senate in terms of hierarchy, right? So you had to have a number of years. Gus Denninger did the body, Harold did the face. Nobody touched the face, nobody did anything with it, it was all Harold. And so here I am, this young kid that keeps coming back year after year, and I want to work on the face. And there's like 17 people in front of me, right? And they're not even being allowed to touch the face at this point. So I decide, how am I going to do this? How am I going to figure this out? And what I would notice is that Harold would use a tool, and then he would go and he would put it down, and then he would go in and he would tell a story. And his stories were magnificent. But he'd go 15, 20 minutes, then he'd come back and he didn't remember where his tool was, right? So I thought, this is my in. So he would go and he'd put down the tool, I would grab the tool, politely wait till he was done with the story, and I would hand it to him. Now the first time he looked at me and said, you don't touch my tools, right? And I got scared and I kind of backed off. And the second time he came back and he's looking for this tool and he can't find it, and he looks at me and goes, well, are you gonna get it or not? So I went to go get the tool, and so slowly over the years, he would say, well, put a hog ring here, or put a wire here, or hold this piece of cloth. And so slowly, surely by surely, he would allow me and he would teach me how to create Zozobra's head. And so I've built Zozobra's head since probably the early 90s.
So you already brought up Kiwanis. This mural that we're sitting in front of, it was painted by Wil Schuster of Zozobra. It was painted in 1964, and that's the year when ownership of Zozobra, or the process of building it, shifted to Kiwanis. Can you tell a little about the history of how they became involved?
Sure. So this all starts with Harold Gans. So Harold Gans was the voice of Zozobra for many years, but he actually had gone to high school with Don Schuster, who was Schuster's son. And so Don would invite Harold to build Zozobra. So as Harold got older, Harold was a Mason, he was everything you could possibly imagine, and he was in Kiwanis. And so Schuster had a heart attack in '64 and started talking about what was he going to do with Zozobra. And how to put this diplomatically, he wasn't impressed with the level of organization with the Fiesta Council. We don't know why, right? But he decided that he was looking for a different way to lead Zozobra to. And Harold really convinced him that Zozobra could do two things, which is one, that the Kiwanis would continue to do this cultural event, but at the same time we could raise money for kids and actually send kids to college. And so that actually won the day. And Schuster then agreed that he would assign all of his rights to Zozobra, to our club, as long as we did it in perpetuity. And so that's our promise to him. Schuster loved these big words. So when I see that perpetuity, it makes me laugh a little bit.
It's a really sweet story, actually. So you talked a bit about kind of the sanctity of the head when it's being built. What about the rest of the body, though? How does it go about actually getting made?
So so the funny thing is that Schuster was brilliant. And so when you read his diaries, I mean, this is the 1930s, and part of what he's talking about Zozobra is that Zozobra is a new art form, right? That the night sky is a black canvas, and that you can paint on this sky with fireworks, right? This is way before Disney or any of these other folks even began to think of this. So his thinking was always outside of the box. And so he decided he would come up with a way that you could actually make a human skull and a body out of frames. And so what you'll see is if you guys ever come, and we've now opened up our construction quite a bit, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but if you come back, you will see that although the sizes of wood and the fact that we have bracing and some other things, basically it's all of Schuster's design. And it fascinates me that you can take boxes and trapezoids, and if you place them at the right place, that you can get this shape of a human skull. And here's the other thing too, is that he also wanted to make sure that it resembled a goblin or a ghoul, but he didn't want it to be too human. It had to be a little bit cartoon-like, because he never wanted anyone to think that we were burning a human at the stake. He wanted everyone to understand that it was this specter that did these things.
That's great. This is one I'm particularly interested in. So when Zozobra first got built, he had like a loincloth and a six-pack, if I remember correctly. And then a little bit down the road in World War II, he was built to kind of look like a combination of Hitler and Mussolini and Curator. And now he's got a kind of a distinctive look for each year that changes a bit. Who designs him? Who gets to decide what Zozobra's going to wear and what his hair is going to be?
That's me.
This is not a plan. I did not know this.
For all of the trouble that Zozobra causes me throughout the year, I get three things. I get to design what he looks like, I get to decide what color his hair is, and I actually get to light him on fire. We make it look like the fire dancer does it, but the fire dancer has never lit Zozobra. There's always been somebody in the back that does that. I'm sorry. I know it's like there's no Santa Claus, right? But really what happened was that so when they started in the 1920s, so what they decided to do is that this was a prisoner, right? And so he was in a loincloth, his chest was showing, and they gave him a cigar, because when you were being executed, you would get something to smoke, right? Well, in the early 1930s, they had continued this tradition, and they had finished putting him up, and Schuster, according to the story, Schuster had decided to make homemade absinthe with cocaine in it, and proceeded to give it to everybody in his crew to see if they would have a different experience watching the burning. Well, what happens is that this gust of wind comes back and takes Zozobra up and slams him back in the pole, and the loincloth comes undone, and it basically comes out into the gown that you see. And nobody volunteers to get back on the ladder because they can't even stand at this point. So Schuster is initially embarrassed at this whole thing. It's in the New Mexican, it looks like he's wearing a dress. And then people would come to him and say, well, that was the best burn we've ever saw. It burned so unique and blah, blah. And so he decided he would try it. So all of a sudden it wasn't a mistake, it was intentional, right? So he comes back and says, oh no, we planned that. At a certain point, we pulled the rope and the gown came out. This is the kind of guy that Schuster was. He was always joking, always very boisterous. So he tried it, and he thought that the second year, while he was sober and actually witnessed it, he thought that it was really a great way to burn this thing. And because he was a specter, now they've started coming out with Casper, and you would see that Casper didn't have legs. He thought, okay, this makes a lot more sense. My specter should basically not have legs either. But what's interesting about this, and I want to say something to both Harold and Gus, who took over the construction of Zozobra after Schuster, is that they were very explicit that he only wore black, right? That he had 3 colors of hair, that they did not change it up. They did not feel that it was theirs to change, and so they felt that they had to basically do a cookie-cutter Zozobra. I've been really fortunate to be able to read Schuster's diary, and I don't think that was ever his intention. He experimented with Zozobra all the time. He wanted different things. He wanted Zozobra to reflect the culture. He wanted him to be interactive and to be live. And so when when we got up to this 10 years that was leading to his 100th anniversary, we decided to do this decades project where we could relive every year. And so what's funny about that is that, as you guys know, people in Santa Fe don't like change, right? Nobody likes change. And so I was thinking about, how do you introduce an element that keeps Zozobra different and fresh every year, but at the same time, we're not changing him because he's such a valued member of our culture, like people are going to be upset. And the way that we're able to do that is to go back and say, we're going to go through the decades and really dress Zozobra and do things that Schuster either talked about. So when we in the 1940s put the fedora on him, that's something that Schuster had talked about. He wanted the Zozobra after hero Hitlerness to really resemble Hitler. And so he gave him the white suit and he gave him the fedora. The thing that happened was that they lost the war, Hitler had committed suicide, and he decided that that next year just wasn't appropriate, that the country needed to move on, that Hitler had been dead, and so he wasn't going to do that. So we took the liberty to say, okay, this was something you wrote about and you wanted to do, we're going to bring that back to life. He talked about the fact that he always wanted to wear a bolo tie, and we check-marked that off, you know. But, so this is a part of being part of art, is that you have to have the ability to be creative. You have to be able to renew yourself and do something different. So that way, not only do you get the people who love the tradition, but you get other people excited about what they can do.
I think that original kind of wardrobe malfunction is what Bob Ross would call a happy accident.
Right.
Okay, so I want to ask you, as somebody who's so close to Zozobra and so knows the history and the story, what do you see his role in Santa Fe's community today as? What does Zozobra mean to the people of Santa Fe?
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna answer that question by taking you through Schuster's mythology, because we haven't done a really good job of getting it out there and a lot of people don't know it. But as I alluded to earlier, so Zozobra for Schuster is this specter. He's a specter that gathers and continues to gather from all of the misdeeds that we do to each other throughout the years until he takes physical form. And as I shared earlier, so once he takes physical form and is out there and doing all this mischief, our town folks get together and invite him to this party, and he accepts it. But that's not where the mythology ends. The idea is that then what Zozobra does is, when he raises up his arms, he throws us into darkness, not just because you want to have a better fireworks show, but it's really a metaphor for gloom taking over, sending out all of the light. And the next thing that happens is that Schuster then takes our children away from us, and he devoids them of any happiness or any hope, and they become gloomies, right? So he's now going to use these gloomies to go and assault and take over as his minions to take over the town. And so the response from that is that the townspeople come back with their bonfires and their torches, and the gloomies, kind of seeing the light from the bonfire, kind of wake up. They snap out of this zombie-like state and they run back to their parents. Well, Zozobra just gets more infuriated, and he actually raises up his arms and he scares away all of the townspeople. So now you're like, okay, Zozobra's going to win, right? Because there's nobody there to stop him. And what's the most beautiful thing about this story is, just as we created Zozobra through our misdeeds and the things that we do to ourselves and to other people, is that we create this fire spirit. We create the fire spirit out of the hope, out of the dignity, out of the kindness, out of the good things that we are. We create this fire spirit that's the light, that's going to do battle with Zozobra. And so it's the two halves of ourselves, this part that causes gloom and this part that causes hope, that do battle. And the fire dancer will always win, because hope will always outdo gloom. And I think that that's the most beautiful tale for us to remember, especially in our city, where there's sometimes that, you know, we get mad at each other and we argue about things, but when it all comes down to it, is that we're all human. We're all people that do things that we shouldn't want to do, but we also can aspire to be the best that we can. And I think that Zozobra both gives us an opportunity as a community to take a moment and remember that and reflect about that, and then also remind us of who we are as a community, so we can go forward and really answer the challenges that we're faced with.
That's really beautiful. I think a lot of us need to hear that right now, so thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to add before we open the floor to questions?
No, I really, it's a huge job. This is Zozobra Event Chairman is a huge job, but it's a huge honor. You know, to walk in the footsteps of Schuster and Harold and Gus, and to continue this tradition for the community. It's a blessing, and it humbles me, because it means so much to this community. And I'm just glad that I get to add my little part for the time that I'm here, and then hand it off to, hand the torch off to the next generation.
Well, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, a
Sure.
little question. How long have you been doing that Zozo Fest?
We started it, so it started 5 years ago, but it really started 11 years ago when we decided that we would put together an art show. And when I actually took over as the event chairman, I went to my construction chairman and I said, okay, I want you to find a building that's going to do two things. One, you're going to build it in it, and then we're going to host the art show. Because for me, the art show is incomplete without the biggest piece of Santa Fe folk art, which is Zozobra himself, right? So why should he miss his own art show? And so we decided that we would marry the two and give everybody an opportunity to come in and see him. And you know, part of Harold and Gus's thing was that the warehouse was always a secret location, right? Nobody saw Zozobra until the day when we put him up. And that was very, very, like, you couldn't share where he was. And it really, we thought long and hard about that because we didn't want to break that tradition. But at the same time, we want our kids, we want everybody in our community to come in and see this amazing thing and touch him and feel him and put your glooms inside of himself. And really, that's how you get excitement, and that's where you start that excitement burning, so that way people will continue this tradition going on into the future.
How far in advance do you actually start the construction?
We do it, so we're really good at construction. We take about 3 weeks in order to construct him. We have it down to 8 hours. We have a plan B. We always considered that some high school kid or some jokester would get to Zozobra and burn him before it was time.
Oh, interesting.
And so we sew a second dress. We have all the stuff that we need, and if we had to, I don't think it would look that great, but we could throw him together in about 8 hours to make a stand-in if we needed to. But it takes about 3 weeks, and everything is so precise. The one thing that Harold used to always tell me when we would finish cutting all the wood for the frames is that, you remember those little trash cans, those little steel trash cans we used to have in school? That the waste from it wouldn't even fit half of that. So we were very good about our cut lists. We know exactly where to cut. And these are strange dimensions. It's like 36 and 3/4, because they make these weird trapezoids. But we were very good about having that cut list and being able to construct them very quickly and efficiently. And we're I always tell my club, we're kind of like Mary and Joseph, because we're always knocking on Santa Fe's businesses to find out where we can build it, because we don't have a home. So it's like, is there any room at the inn? Can we?
Did you have a hand in Zozobra?
In Tio Coco?
No, Zozobra.
No, Zozobra, no. That was something that organically started on its own.
What is that?
So it's
The governor, it was the governor's weekend, and
Oh no, that was Tio Coco.
Okay.
So let me explain. So the governor conference came to us and said, we would like you to build a full-scale Zozobra for the National Governors Conference that what we're doing. And so the first thing we thought about was like, you can't really do this because Zozobra belongs to Santa Fe, it belongs to the people of Santa Fe. But again, history has to be your guide. So we went back into our archives and we saw that Schuster actually produced Tio Coco for the premiere of the Santa Fe Trail with Earl Flynn and Ronald Reagan. And so in the 1940s, Warner Brothers sent a letter to Schuster and said, would you consider building a Zozobra for this? And he writes back and says, no, I won't do Zozobra because Zozobra is only through fiesta times and for the people of Santa Fe. But his cousin will step in and Tio Coco will be there. And so we felt that we had the ability to do that. So that was the first question. Do we have the authority to actually do a Zozobra outside of fiesta time? And so we were able to answer that question because of Tio Coco. But the other thing is that we decided as a club that we wanted this to get to a national level. And with the amount of people and the sponsors that were coming in, that this would be a good exposure for Zozobra because it's very expensive. we don't have a traditional venue. We have to create the venue. So you have to bring in the lighting and the porta potties and the fencing and all of these things. And so we've been really good at keeping the costs of the figure and the costs of the fireworks down, but we're not very good at being able to keep down the costs of security, which continue to go up. And so this was our opportunity to really look for a national sponsor. And we had 3 really good bites with 3 major companies. And the reason we want that sponsor is twofold. One is that we want to be able to keep that $10 ticket for as long as possible. $10 and kids 10 and under free, right? And that's critical to us because we want this to be an affordable event for families. We want them to be able to have that. But as the security costs continue to rise, we're faced with doing stuff like premium tickets. So we started selling premium tickets and we got a lot of criticism for that. But what we decided to do was take places in the venue that had never been used before and convert those into premium tickets that we could sell at a higher price. But we were very careful to say, listen, if you get there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you want to get at the front, just the way your family did for generations, you're still going to be able to do that. So we're trying to be responsible about how we fund this. And then again, my club comes back to me and looks at me like, hey, we're your shareholders, where's our profit? Because we want to give it to kids. So you have this competing interest, which is that you have to provide this amazing cultural event, but at the same time, the reason why volunteers hundreds and hundreds of hours to do this is they want to be able to give back to kids. And so that financial aspect we're struggling with, and that's one of the reasons we agreed to do it, was that we wanted to get exposure to some of these national corporations to see if we could get a national sponsorship.
We live in the San Francisco area, and we came to Santa Fe 17 years ago to visit friends, and we knew nothing about Zozobra. But we were taken to Zozobra, and we bought one of those little doll things. I still have that.
That's awesome.
And coincidentally, it was 2001 when we came. And 9/11 was a couple days later, which was really weird because of, but we knew it was burning your woes
Right.
and everything. So we remember the pet parade, which was the best pet parade I've ever seen. But what is the schedule? We arrived on a Sunday and our friends took us to a little parade, a late night parade. Then we did Zozobra and there was the pet parade. And as we remember it, it was after Labor Day, so that the tourists were gone and the locals were here.
Right.
What is the schedule now?
So the schedule is a little wonky. So what happened? Initially Fiestas was actually held on Labor Day weekend. Okay? And then back in the 1970s, you had a motorcycle gang that came in and they went through the plaza and they broke the windows and they did all these other stuff. And so the town decided that the Fiestas had gotten too unruly, and so they moved Fiestas to the week after the week after Labor Day. So Zozobra had been on that Friday, and unfortunately in 1997, we had an incident on the plaza in which the police came back and said, we can't be in 2 places at once, because what traditionally had happened is that people would watch Zozobra burn, then they would come down to the plaza for a street dance. And half of the people would stay at Zozobra and half of the people would come down, and the police just couldn't be spread that thin. And so they moved Zozobra to the Thursday before Fiesta Friday, so that way you could. Well, the problem with that was that all of our kids, you kept the tourists away, but you also kept all the kids away because the kids had to get up and go to school. And so what we saw happening was that all the kids were not coming to Zozobra. And for us, that was a no. That was couldn't happen because we had to have those kids. They had to have a connection to this event. They're the ones who are going to continue this, and if they didn't see it while they were kids, I was afraid that magic was going to be gone for them. So what we decided to do was go back and say, okay, Zozobra started out the week before Fiestas. So again, history is going to be our teacher. We're going to go back and put Zozobra on Labor Day weekend, which is a week before Fiesta. So we met the condition of not having police in 2 places at one time, but at the same time allowing Zozobra to have its place on a Friday night, allowing our kids to come in there. And now we are getting a lot more tourists because it is on a national holiday. But we're also getting a lot of expatriates who can now come home and show their husbands or their kids this tradition that they've grown up with.
I think we've got time for one more question.
This is fantastic. I've read all the newspaper accounts of Zozobra over the years, and I've never heard some of this. Amazing. It sounds like you have worked on Zozobra every year for all of your, since you were 3 or 4. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just wondering, was there a time when you expected to, you know, go to college and major in whatever you were thinking about? What was your plan B?
So, you know, it's funny because it's actually said ever since I was 6. So I have been with Zozobra, and it was, so I went to undergraduate at American University in DC, and that actually wasn't that bad, leaving for that week to come do construction and do Zozobra. I could get caught up, but when I went to law school in Boston, so the first year I actually tried to explain to my Bostonian law professor what we were doing, and it didn't go anywhere. So the following year, I just told everybody I had a death in the family, right? Zozobra's like family, and he was gonna die, so, you know, it wasn't that far off. And I'll never forget when I graduated, one of my other professors came up to me and she goes, you know, I just want you to know that I've always found it curious that you have a relative who dies the same time every year. And so I wasn't very good at doing that. But I'll tell you another funny story. So I became a lawyer and I was in Seattle. And at that time I was building the face and doing the fireworks. And I had a trial that was coming up the next week. And so I decided I would leave that Saturday morning, really early in the morning, get back to Seattle, start doing some witness preparation. And I had forgot that, you know, no matter how much you take a shower, you just smell like gunpowder and sulfur. So I'm in the Albuquerque airport, and I mean, Zozobra is physically exhausting, okay? I'm usually just on top of that hill, and I will walk anywhere from 25 to 30 miles just in that hill. So I'm exhausted and I'm walking through, and they decide that they're gonna pull me over to go through the machine, right? So I get up, I put my hands up, and it goes through, and of course, every alarm goes off, because I have gunpowder under my nail. So these guys come and they tackle me, right? And I have to explain this, and I almost missed my plane, I almost got arrested. So Zozobra's had his revenge on me.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Okay, one more question.
This is not a question. I just wanted to share with everybody that there's a wonderful Zozobra art exhibit at the Historic Santa Fe Foundation. It's going to be open until September 28th. If you want to see some other stuff besides the Schuster stuff, it's a good opportunity to go to Rome. I think from 9 to 5, I think, every day. It's on Canyon Road at Elsa One, which is also an incredible building. If you're going from here, you should see it.
Really?
It's really wonderful.
Where is that?
Elsa One, it's on Canyon Road, about halfway up on the left-hand side. Look for the white picket fence and the only horse chestnut tree in Santa Fe that's still alive.
Oh.
Okay, so Zozobra art exhibit at the Historic Santa Fe Foundation. You guys check that out too.
Where does the name come from?
So that's great. So he was Old Man Groucher for 3 years of his existence, and Schuster decided that he wanted him to have a Spanish name. So he went down to Dana E. Johnson at the New Mexican, and he said, "You got to help me name my monster." And so they grab an old Spanish England dictionary, and they look up gloom, and they see Zozobra, which is to cause gloom or to cause a shipwreck, right? And Schuster was in a shipwreck on his way back from France and was saved off this shipwreck. And so he was like, "That's it. That's the name. It's done." And so, you know, of course, right? It couldn't be anything simple. It had to be something that happened. So that's where the name comes from.
You really can't make this stuff up.
Right? It's amazing.
Well, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Oh,